Hello, my friend Terence. I appreciate you being here today. This is Burn the Ship podcast, where we help entrepreneurs go all in on their business by introducing them to other entrepreneurs and professionals. I was introduced to you by someone else that was on the podcast, Eddie Johnson, good friend of mine, an incredible message as well, and just kept alluding to how valuable and how different your story is, and what a privilege it's going to be today to hear more of that story and kind of direct it towards some of our entrepreneurs. So why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about your story, and lead that into kind of what your business is, and tell us what you do.
Well, hey man, I'm excited to be on. And so quick background on me. From Chicago, married to, just amazing woman, 39 years. Three kids. Just been blessed. Man, my heroes are my mother and my father. As we grew up in Chicago, man, and they just wanted the best. And so, my career, man, I started my first job when I was 6 years old. I mean, literal job, and it was all motivated by the love of candy. And so, I've been working since, man, just enjoying it. So I'm happy to be here. Big thing for me is corporate background, 25 years, own my own business as well. So I know the difference in signing the front of the check as well as the back of the check. And then been in the nonprofit space, man, for the last 12 and a half years. And just, man, we want to see families thriving and flourishing around the world. And to date, the Lord has opened the door. We can train over 100,000 families. But what I've done is taking what I've learned and been nurtured by others and through the marketplace, and carry that over not only into my own life and my family and so forth, but also to other families around the world.
Sure. And so what are the problems that you're looking to solve as people come to you and they want to really reinforce that relationship that they have with their family? What are some of the problems that you see, and how do you approach and solve those problems?
We're really in some of the most challenging times in our nation, and this isn't new. We've been seeing these trends for probably well over 50, 60 years. The days that, for me, an example, we go to church on Sunday and we spend that time with the family. Sunday, there was nothing else open other than church and things of that nature. And we would spend time, we'd talk about and shape biblical worldviews and things of that nature. And we used to debate these issues. And to see a biblical worldview declining from 65% back in 1965 or so to now adult males, in America, that biblical literacy is around 6%. So one, that's an issue, right? The very values of our nation is shifting. Secondly, we often talk about fatherless homes and things of that nature. How do we be dads in homes? But more importantly, even in the workplace, when we look at that, our leaders, integrity, those non-negotiables, they're being challenged today in many ways. And we've seen that played out in the last year and a half. So when we look at the very values that make up our character, that makes up the very core values of a business, of the marketplace, an individual, et cetera, we see a shift in America around those values. And I believe is impacting not only home, but the marketplace and society around us.
Sure. And so when I was kind of doing my homework, one of the questions that I had for you specifically, and I'll tell you kind of where this came from, how is it that you define family? Because what I really want to know that is because these ideals and these kind of lessons that you're teaching people, where all does that kind of cross over within your life? What skills are you really developing there, and how can they help you in the different avenues of your life?
I have to be quite frank with you. I mean, my definition for family come out of Genesis, the book of Genesis, the Bible, and it tells me that a family and how it's designed and what it's meant for and so forth. So that's the basics of the foundation of how I define family. For me, that family has been a husband and wife and children, and we're here to grow the population of this world, and it's been that way from the very beginning. There's also other parts of family. When people think of family, as people that they trust, as people that they've confided in, as people that loves them and cares for them unconditionally. And that's why many may seek that love and affirmation from so many other sources, and they call those sources family. But when I'm talking about the essence of family, I'm speaking of the family unit in home. and the extended family beyond that. Back in history, it was the goal of the patriot of the family to never lose a family member, to always keep them within the folds of the family, to go and make sure that they're being nurtured and loved and cared for. Well, the bigger picture of that, we have a family within the nation of America. We have a family within our community, and we have a family within the four walls of our home. So it depends on which way you want to look at that.
Sure.
That's how I'm defining family is one, this family unit at home that's loving and caring and nurturing and so forth. But there's also a family in the community to be loving and caring and so forth. But there's also a family in our nation as we represent America. And we are to be united, not necessarily agreeable. We don't have to agree on everything, but we have to be united in what we stand for and some of the values and some of the things that we believe in to be true so that we can carry forth the very fabric or DNA of what America is all about.
Sure. And in that 100,000 families that you spoke of, where do those families live and how did they find you?
Yeah, so we started out really in my own home, training. I was falling short as the spiritual leader in my own home. In fact, I had abdicated that to the church and my wife. But being challenged by that, I had to take on the responsibility to what that is. Now, I want to maybe help your audience and yourself understand that doesn't mean maybe what most people think, because I was falling short as a spiritual leader. My kids knew the Lord. I was walking with the Lord. I was actually leading youth in my church and so forth. But being intentional about being the spiritual leader, identifying where the vision is, where the horizon, where am I taking them? I didn't really define the target. If you start any business or marketplace, you define the target, you define the end, and you work towards the end in mind. That I hadn't done. I had abdicated that to the church. And so with that responsibility, I call it the Ephesians 6:4 moment, where it says, fathers, really speaking to parents, don't exasperate your children, but to train and instruct them in the Lord. So we started in my own home. And then that moved out, had no plans to start a ministry or anything else. As parents began to ask, what are we doing that may be different than what they're doing? Our kids are doing some things a little differently in our family. And what are we doing that maybe they should consider? We started to just roll that out and give it away and start to train other parents, and started very small. And all of a sudden parents start to go deep and they start to share us with others. And then a breakthrough came when we joined one of the most prolific family ministries in the nation and really worldwide. And that began to take our content out and train over 30,000 churches. 100,000 parents came through. And now we're global in nature on 5 continents. And the Lord just opens the door where we're seeing families begin to get the very basics, to be intentional, to train and instruct their children. We start out with helping them to produce a written spiritual plan to help lead, guide, and direct their way. Because I believe if you don't write it down, you just don't get it done. And a lot of times we want to do the right thing. We just don't know how. I'm an optimist by nature. We want to do the right thing as parents. We want our kids to have a great life, but a lot of times we just don't know how to get there, right? We put a lot of rules in place, put a lot of handcuffs on them, and say, do this and do that. Well, I call that performance theology. I'm not interested in performance theology and what you do necessarily unless you understand what has been done on your behalf, that you should fall madly in love with what he's done. And that's what compels you to do, as James says, it's compelled out of love for the Father and his Son and the grace that he's bestowed. Now you're compelled to do versus obligated to do. And there's a big difference in that track.
Sure. What are some of the experiences that you've had with the cultural differences from working in all of those different places while still trying to solve, a problem that's pretty universal?
Well, culturally, I've been blessed on the marketplace side. I started out working for organizations like Johnson and Johnson, Citibank, and Coca-Cola. And when I think about Johnson and Johnson, I had a perfect example set for me by the then, he's now deceased, but just a wonderful guy. His name was Dr. James Burke. And Dr. James Burke was the CEO of Johnson and Johnson at the time. And you may be too early to remember this, but back in 1982 in Chicago, there was a thing called the Tylenol incident where 7 people lost their lives due to tainted cyanide capsules of
Mhm.
Tylenol product. Well, that was my territory. As a 3 month old coming out of University of Illinois, I was in the Chicagoland market, and this incident happened in my backyard. But I saw a CEO with the type of integrity and ethics and core values that I'm speaking of. I saw that at work firsthand. And of course, the fast story of that is not only did we recover in 3 months, which is a case study today, but we did it with integrity. We did it with a set of values. In fact, what Dr. James Burke pointed us to in the moment of crisis was a set of core values. We call it a credo. And he on the wall of Johnson Johnson today in Brunswick, New Jersey, is a wall that speaks to the credo of the company. And in that credo gives you kind of the values and the approach that the company decides to take in crisis situations. We took that approach. We lived it out, and I saw it firsthand as a young man coming out of school, first job. Well, how can I take those type of values, characteristics, etc., into the same atmosphere at home, right? And how do I begin to see that flourish? So I had great models, but our nation and the family, etc., is shifting because we're getting away from those very core values that made us great. For example, one of those core values that I was taught very early on is that people have intrinsic value. We all are valuable people. We don't have to agree with everyone, but we have value because I understand who made us, and that person made us has made us with great value. But if I understand that as a marketplace leader, that everyone has great value, whether you're a janitor or CEO of a company, then I treat you like you have intrinsic value. Same as a family, as a marriage. If I love my wife as the Father loves me, then my wife has intrinsic value. My children have intrinsic value, and I'm going to do everything I can to love them unconditionally. Right? It doesn't mean we have to agree on everything. In fact, I think we're so busy trying to be agreeable that we miss the essence of what He has for us. And so that's our purpose, is to see people with the value that they are and to move forward in a way to care and nurture and to be a positive influence in people's lives, starting at home.
Sure. And so, have you had those types of interactions in the U.S., different countries, different continents as well? Is the kind of that traditional idea of the patriarch, is that consistent pretty much everywhere that you've kind of had these types of interactions, or have you only had those interactions in the United States?
No, it varies. When you go international, I've been quite a few international countries, Europe, Africa, Asia. I mean, it's all there is this deep kind of um, approach and acceptance of leadership in a different way when you go to Asia and when you go to South Africa and things of that nature. But in America, we've kind of lost. You got to understand, when we lose 72% of our men are not in the households today. Uh, we have a breakdown in our system. When you see that, it's not that way when you go across the pond. People stay together. They connect together. They understand the power of family. When I go to places like Italy, family is so important. When I go to other, India and different places, you might see challenges because of poverty and so many other things. But family is the central unit that they try to stay united to. In America, family has been fragmented more ways than we've ever seen it. And so that's impacting our cultures, impacting our societies, impacting our homes, our communities. And we have to get back to a form of unity. Over the last year, we faced this thing around, we've been talking about unity and the division that exists in this nation. Well, that division, I believe we've got to start with that unity in the home. We've got to teach our children what it means to love other people, what it means to support people. We don't have to agree, but we've got to begin to teach these basic lessons at home. Most biblical worldviews are shaped between the ages of 3 and 13 years of age. And if we're not teaching our kids at home, someone else will. And so I just believe that as parents, or whoever has authority in the home, guardianship authority for that child, it could be a single parent, it could be a grandparent, it could be a couple, I don't really care. Whoever has that authority, we have to begin to train and instruct them in the way of the Lord, or we're going to lose. I say no society can thrive beyond its spiritual condition. And we have lost or it's losing our spiritual condition, and the influence of the church is declining, and we've got to find a way to bring that back.
Sure. What are some new challenges that you've seen face as this kind of spiritual integrity of society continues to decay? What are, are some of those challenges, digressing? Are they evolving, or are they pretty consistent?
Well, most will say they will speak to all of the negative things in our society. They'll speak to fragmented families. They'll speak to, single parent household. They'll speak to so many things, incarceration rates and so forth. But I'm an optimist. The victory has been won. And so I look at things like, how do we go from 12 who are followers of Christ to now billions of people who are followers of Christ? When I go overseas, people are so thirsty for God's word. I mean, if you were to just bring a Bible in their own language, I tell you, they embrace that with so much love. And because, we have a smorgasbord, right? We can go on every corner. We'll find a church. We can go anywhere. We'll find materials and Bibles and all. The fact is, it's not the issue that we don't have the word of God. It's just that we're not living out the word of God. And I always say the biggest gap is between what we know and what we do. We know what to do as people. We know we are to love each other. We know we're not to, be racist or hate other people and do that. But yet we do just the opposite sometimes. And there's a reason for that. When we begin to dismiss the fact that everyone has intrinsic value and that it's just not your agenda that's important, but it's everyone's agenda that leads up to a common goal, a common target, we'll begin to do life differently.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
You know, and let me just give you, where I come from. I grew up in the 60s and 70s. I grew up in Chicago, Illinois, and Chicago was probably more divided than any state or any city in this country. When you talk about Alabama or Mississippi and all that, Chicago was the only place that Martin Luther King never finished his march, was Chicago, Illinois. It was a place of deep division and segregation. I grew up in that community. And as I went into schools that didn't look like me, and my mother was a school teacher, and she would teach me things like, Terence, you have to love them more than they hate you. I'm like, why do they hate us? I mean, what is going on that you would hate another person so deeply? And even as a young child, that you would want to harm them. And so when you're taught those type of principles that you are to love more than hate, that everyone has intrinsic value, that, you're not superior, but you're certainly not inferior to any man, but you live your life in such a way that glorifies the Father, it changes your perspective and how you approach people. And that's what we have to get back to. We have to bring unity in the spirit if this nation is to survive the pandemic that is in right now. The pandemic that we're in right now is not around COVID. It's greater than COVID. And we have to find a way to really work through this issue.
Sure. I completely agree. Tell me, as someone in the audience, is looking to kind of, you're probably identifying a lot of problems with people that they haven't really diagnosed or identified for themselves. Tell us, if people want to have a further discussion with you about that, how they kind of get a hold of you.
Oh, thank you for that. Transformation begins in me, right? So transformation begins in us individually. And we love to have dialogue and conversation. They can find us at Victorious, that's IOUS, victoriousfamily.org. Also, I'm on social media and things like that. I love to engage in a conversation. And particularly, I'm focused now around the family. I want to see families strengthened and healthy, because I think if we start in the family unit, then we can move on to generations, right? So our whole strategy is to equip a generation to reach a generation. And you can find that at victoriousfamily.org.
Cool. And then as well, kind of in the beat of the the brand of the podcast, tell me this is, as you have the burn the ship to us is really going all in on your business, is committing to something. Tell me, from the point of view of an entrepreneur, or the that person that is responsible for the family, whatever family that may be. Tell us how really, what commitment means to you. Tell me what it means to you for people to really go all in on their family as well as their business.
Yeah, I've been in that position of a leader that's trying to build something, right? As an entrepreneur, as corporate America as well. When you're trying to build something, you're so focused, you're so committed to it that sometimes you shift your priorities, not intentionally. And I've learned that if my priorities is God, my wife, my children, and then whatever He's placed in my life after that, whether it be business, etc., I'm to keep that order of prioritization. If I lose that order of prioritization, my mindset shifts significantly. I'll give you an example of this. When I worked at Coca-Cola, and I was at a very high level. I probably managed an area about 2/3 of the Coca-Cola company, about $50 billion. I was probably 36 years old. And one of my mentors said to me, he says, Terence, who do you work for? And I work for Coca-Cola, right? Well, then who do who's your customer? And he started asking me all these questions, and I'm thinking, I work for Coca-Cola. I report to, whoever my leader is. People report to me. This is my customer. He says, no, that's all wrong. He says, now let's reorganize that. The owner of the company, if we shift that from the owner of Coca-Cola to God, everything else shifts. So if God is the owner of your company, then who do they report to? Well, then Coca-Cola. Then who do you report to? Well, leadership of Coca-Cola. Then who's your customer? What's the people that report to me?
Mm-hmm.
And then who are their customers? Well, there's people who report to them. So he says, focus on the right thing. He says, a lot of times what we do is we take a target that we've identified and we shoot the arrow, but we move the target.
Right.
So we can hit a bullseye and say, look, see, I was successful. But we never define the target before we shoot the arrow. And we're good at that. In the family, we have to do the same thing. We have to define the destination before we shoot the arrow. Because if not, we'll wander from place to place, never knowing if we ever ended up at the
Right.
destination that we desire. You see, I mean, I'll take one from a person that doesn't even fit the spiritual and what I'm speaking of, but Warren Buffett. Warren Buffett gave us an amazing lesson when he was asked, Warren, how would you define success? And many people thought it would be around how much money and this and success or whatever, and his legacy. He says, no. Here's how he defines success, and I'll define it the same way. He says, when I die, if the people that I loved or cared to love me, then I'm successful. You see, if my wife loves me, when I leave here, I'm successful. If my kids love me, when I leave here, I'm successful. You see, Coca-Cola won't even think of me again because they're not in a relationship to love me. They're in a relationship to pay me for hard work, for a job well done. And they may care for me, they may love me, they may even give me a green jacket and a pension. For the young folks, I'll explain what a pension is later on. But for the family unit, that's love. That's where love has to be nurtured and love has to be cultivated and nurtured. Because see, when we leave this place, the only thing that will carry forth is that legacy of love. And I'd rather start in my own home before I start to go outside of that. So that's one of the things I'll just lend to you is that if you can leave this place knowing that the people that you love also love you, you've had a successful life.
Sure. Well, I appreciate you coming on the podcast today. You've given us
Amen.
a lot to ponder for sure. And I hope some people in the audience take advantage of what you're saying. There are so many different points of view out there, and how to be successful. And I don't think a lot of attention goes to how to be successful within your own family. So I appreciate kind of the tools that you've given to our organization and the stuff for us to think about. And we'll definitely, recap this again and see if we can't put out some more content in the right direction.
Well, I appreciate you, brother. And I just close it. If we can figure out how to love at home, it'll make our loving in the workplace even greater.
Absolutely. Thank you,
Thank
sir.
you, brother.
Appreciate you coming
Appreciate you.
on.
Take care.